This is the BEMO Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, we're with Elle Grover Fricks to begin our study of the life of Joseph, covering Genesis 37 through 40.
We should probably do a little bit of review. It just seems like true to form. We should have a presentation for probably a little bit later today in the episode. It's not going to be much. It's going to be like a slide or two. We'll eventually get away from doing these kinds of slides for you. But towards the beginning here in session 1, sometimes it's great when you can visually see the text next to each other, have some things pointed out visually so you can kind of start getting used to seeing it and finding it yourself. So we may have, towards the end of our discussion today, a slide or two that you find in a presentation there. But with no further ado, first of all, let me say hi to Elle. Hi, Elle.
Hi. Excited to be here.
Elle's back. Just makes me want to come up with theme music. But I digress.
Sounds like a great panel question. I'll pick everybody's intro music.
But I'm just going to keep moving. I'm not going to take that bait. We have this review, speaking of theme music, that creation is good. Like creation, that's God's theme music, is this idea that creation is good. There's this invitation. It's Genesis 1 through 11 is like this statement of creation is good and trust me. And we know in Genesis 1 through 11 that the characters of the story struggle to do that. They struggle to trust, but eventually God does meet a family that does this. And they are far from perfect, man. They are riddled with mistakes. But they do. Their story is defined by these key moments of knowing what it means to trust the story. And so God meets a guy by the name of Avram. And his story is littered with ups and downs, but willing to walk one foot in front of the other in faithfulness and towards trust and faith. His son Yitzhak, in this almost seeing this, we called it the mission realized, like Isaac gets to taste of some of the things that God said he wanted to do through his father. He starts to see some of those things, some of the fruit of that in his own life. And then we get to Jacob, and Jacob was this character that we looked at, and he's somewhat, in a lot of ways, I mean, you could frame this any way you wanted to, but in some ways, Jacob's thrown the story off. Like we had Avram, and then we have Isaac, and the mission's being realized, and then we have like this character who is the central character. He is Jacob, who will be named Israel, and yet he feels kind of like this weird, slimy, he's growing, he's developing, but he's got this. Talk about ups and downs. We got a dysfunctional family on our hands. And so we see that, we just see that at play here. And so from Jacob, we get to Joseph, which is where we want to get into today. And the Jacob story really doesn't resolve itself because the Jacob story follows us right into the Joseph story, obviously because he's Joseph's father, but even more so who he is, the theme of his story is going to follow us all the way through the very last closing chapters of the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit. So, Brent, if that is enough by way of review, you should get us into the first. I'm going to have you read an entire whopping 2 verses of Genesis 37.
Well, the NIV is generous and gives me 3 paragraphs out of those 2 verses, so it feels like a pretty good chunk.
That's pretty good.
Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them.
Brent, do you remember the problem that you saw? Like, we're used to starting, what are the problems you see? Do you remember the problem you saw years ago when we recorded the first episode?
Yeah, I was asking why it's only the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah and not, I mean, Joseph was there, so yeah, sure. I guess Rachel's represented, but no Leah at all, and maybe no Benjamin.
Yeah, and no mention of, just Bilhah and Zilpah. Elle, do you have any insight as to what could be taking place here in the Hebrew and the family dynamics in the story? What do you see?
I have some ideas. So this section starts with, this is the history of the family of Yaakov, right? These are the toldot, the generations, which is a way that you usually start off talking about somebody's legacy. And then I'll say right after. So we have then Adam and Eve. We have that in Noach. Noach says that he was righteous and just, right? And here we have, what is his legacy? Well, he's got Yosef, and Yosef is only hanging out with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. So this potentiality for split family dynamics, potentially exclusion from the sons of Leah. This continuing theme where we had Rachel and Leah battling it out for a few chapters seems to have continued. And Tanakh, the Torah, or the Bible here, points the finger at Yaakov, I think, by putting up at the front, this is the story of the Toldot of Yaakov. He hasn't resolved this problem that's been marking his family for a decade or so. And it seems like this conflict of mothers has been passed down amongst the sons and kept Yosef away from the sons of Leah. And instead, he's hanging out with Zilpah and Bilhah's kids.
Man, that's so good. We didn't have that the first go around. That's some new, updated, added. I just love that insight. That is fantastic.
And now I'm wondering, like, who is actually at play here? So the sons, back in Genesis 35, the sons of Bilhah are Dan and Naphtali. Sons of Zilpah are Gad and Asher. So it's those four. Maybe, I guess it could be one. Like there still could be missing, but the text doesn't say. So should we assume that they're all there? It's the four of them plus Joseph.
Yeah, it's a good question. I like the idea of this sense of conflict, division. Very interesting.
I can't even remember if this is this episode or the next episode where we get into this, but notably missing Reuben and Judah and Benjamin.
Oh, yeah. You may want to put
up.
You may want to put a pin in that. Okay, I like that.
Just a little pin.
All right, okay. I love that. Okay, the note that I have for me is that Joseph seems to lack some practical wisdom here. Like he comes and he's got this negative report that he brings to Dad. And you're going to sense this throughout my treatment of Joseph. And man, I have taken heat for my opinions and positions on Yosef for years since we released session 1 the first time. You would think, Brent, that now I have the opportunity to correct that and to... And you know what? My opinions haven't changed. And I'm not trying to make Joseph out to be a villain. Don't mishear me. By the time this story is done, there's going to be an incredible story of reconciliation and redemption. But I feel like what I'm seeing is a son that in a lot of ways is following in the footsteps of his Jacob father, like his somewhat deceptive, he seems very I'll point it out all the way through the story. He seems very self-focused. I don't know if I would go as far as say selfish, but definitely has and that could be coming from me. I have a personality. I've had narcissistic tendencies in the past. It's where my sin likes to creep its ugly head. So I probably see myself in the Yosef character. He feels kind of narcissistic to me. But, I brought Elle on these episodes because I knew that Elle would back me up here. We tend to share an opinion on good old Yosef.
That is true. I don't know what that says about my personality, but I do agree. And I think it's even more evident in the Hebrew. When you look at the English translation, it will say something like, he brought an ill report of them, which makes him kind of come off as a tattletale. But in the Hebrew, it's more specific. It says that he brings evil is a big word, creeping, whispered rumors to his father, which has an extra degree of gravity to me than just like, Dad, I saw the boys not paying attention to the sheep in the field like you told them to. This is evil, creeping, whispered rumors. So feels like there's more darkness, more resentment, bitterness getting passed down from the family situation than just, a younger brother being a, annoying younger brother.
Yeah, more a little bit more intent.
Yeah.
Okay, Brent, give us a couple more verses.
And just to close the loop on my other thought, it says the sons, plural, of Bilhah and the sons, plural, of Zilpah, and they're only 2 each, so it's got to be all 4. So anyway, my mind is settled on that. Verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him.
So, Elle, does the Hebrew say, literally, Technicolor Dreamcoat? What are we working with here?
Actually, absolutely. Technicolor was a term in the Bronze Age. No, it doesn't. What it says is it has a specific word for a kind of garment that I'll talk about in a second. But specifically, it says it goes to its palms, his palms. It's a coat of palms. And that's unusual because the general outfit for your average man in the Levant and the Bronze Age, and we know this because of different Egyptian depictions, usually, of people from Canaan and Israelites. They usually have their undergarments, and then they have a big open rectangle that they wear with the arms poking out. So you can work easily in that. You can take that thing off for work, etc. But the Hebrew word for what is gifted to Yosef here is this undergarment that, instead of being like a little skirt type situation, it's a long sleeved undergarment. So it's not the coat with long sleeves that a priest would get. His dad isn't giving him that kind of status marker, but he is getting a garment that isn't really made for work. It's not made for getting down with the sheep and wading through the thorns and all the things that you have to do agriculturally. It's a garment for more leisure, sitting around, going to his palms. It's got some length.
I remember when I heard Foreman teach on this, and we're going to probably list over this episode and the next episode we're going to try to reference a lot of different Foreman teachings. They've influenced my own so much. But Foreman pointed out the point here isn't even necessarily the kind of garment. It's that he gets the second one. Dad gives everybody a garment. It's Dad's job to provide everybody with their sustenance and their food and their clothing and those kind of things. And we might even include mom and dad, however we want to say that, Elle. Which, by the way, I forgot to say this in the review, but it's worth a little side note on that little comment we just made there. We have talked, I think, in past episodes, we've used this language that we used years ago about provision. Like when Avram marries, when these patriarchs marry these women, like they're providing for. And you made a great point in our preparation for the episode, which is when we say provision, we're not talking about the way that it's the man who provides everything for them, all their material sustenance, but it's a family of belonging. It's the community that enables our survival. So we don't want to give this impression. I think in the future, like 300 episodes from now, we're going to talk about primitivism and what was the other one that you had? Presentism, where we just assume that it was way different back then, or we assume it's just like it is today. And I know that I did that years ago in our original episodes. And so when we talk about those kinds of things, the things that are important to elevate is that people have a community that they belong to, a Beit Av, a Mishpacha. Mm-hmm. Did I say that well? What would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. The providing construct that we have in our era is just very different than back then, where it's the whole community, it's your whole extended family, and everyone is working together. In that specific episode, we talk about like what would women be doing every day, and what are their skills, and what are their tasks that they're about. So if you jump forward and listen to that, they're doing an awful lot. And it's still a patriarchal society and a patrilineal society and a patrilocal society. So all of that is going on. But related to this story, right, we see that different women are doing different things and the men are also doing different things, and yet it's still under this central Beit Av, house of the father.
I did a lot of study this last year. I didn't really see it coming, but I just ended up studying in my part of the library to ancient Israel families, the land of the Bible, what family. And one of the points that multiple sources, academic sources, kept making was women were very active in the daily provision of what happens in the Beit Av. So I caught myself right there saying, Dad, it's Dad's job. And by that, we really mean it's the Beit Av's job, overseen by this patrilineal reality. But it's Dad's job to provide clothes for his kids. Every son would have had, it's the Beit Av's job every son would have had a coat. And yet Yosef seems to get a second coat. And we've talked about this in the last couple episodes, this idea of Bachur. And so by giving him a second coat, it would seem that Dad, Jacob, is giving a pretty clear message to the other brothers. Make no mistake. I know we've already talked about Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah, and I know everybody's trying to figure out like who's who and what's the pecking order and who was firstborn. And it seems like what Jacob very clearly could be doing and is the seat of so much of this dislike with the amongst the brothers is that Dad's made a very clear statement. Yosef is my Bahor. He gets the 2 coats. He gets the double portion. He's the one that brings me my fancy little reports. You kind of see that brewing here in this story.
And I'm thinking of like the extra dynamic of how he has, the 2 wives and the 2, or they are wives. They're all 4 wives. Yeah. So he has so much more complication going on there. Whereas in other circumstances, you might think like, oh, maybe Jacob is making the coat himself, or maybe he's purchasing the coat or whatever. Maybe the wife is doing that and giving to him and he does the presentation, whatever. But now it's like, what are the backroom conversations going on here?
Sure.
Like, is there some argument where Leah's like, excuse me, I have your firstborn son. What are you doing with that thing? Where'd you get that from? And Rachel's like, well, he didn't get it from me.
Sure.
Like, what is all this conversation going on behind the scenes? Because it's so much more complicated than just a simple monogamous relationship.
Which Bechor means chosen, and we use it as firstborn because so often the firstborn was the chosen. But Yosef is the firstborn. He is the Bechor, but he's the Bechor of Rachel. So Yaakov is ignoring Leah's supremacy as the first wife, and so layers upon layers of drama.
Yes, totally. All right, Brent, keep us going.
Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
Yeah, this is some of the verses that I love to go to for all these people that are so upset with me, that I would take such a position on Joseph. And I'm like, really? Joseph's just willing to just walk up and share these stories the way that he shares them. Like, he's just like, this is, and they're like, yeah, he's just telling him the dreams. Okay, but you don't have to tell the dreams, and you don't have to tell it this way, and you don't have to tell it like this. Really feels to me like he knows darn well what he's doing. Even Jacob, and I'm suggesting that this is Dad, maybe even his favorite son. Even Jacob seems to be cautioning, rebuking Joseph. Now, it might be because he's a little upset about how he's bowing down. Even I and your mother are going to bow down in this story. Could be that.
In the first dream there, which is only his brothers, it seems to me that there might be something euphemistic going on, especially keeping in mind that wheat sheaves are traditionally fertility symbols. And so there feels to me like there's an extra little oomph in there other than just like, guys, I have a destiny and a future.
Yeah.
It's very pointed.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like that's, and I can't remember where this note came from, Brent. I can't remember if this was in our episode from years ago, but I haven't in my notes somewhere have the roles switched with the mocking. Like, it was Isaac and Ishmael, but now has Joseph. Did you ask me that question the last time we did this years ago? Do you remember that?
I don't know.
Yeah, because we have the story about Isaac mocking. And do we actually see a reversal of, well, now all of a sudden it's the family of promise and this chosen son who's now doing the mocking of the brother. So interesting, could be.
Okay, so I guess I have to be the one to defend Joseph here in this scenario because we have a couple of anti-Yosefers. But he gets this robe and is like set aside as someone special in the family. And then he has these dreams and he's like, Dad, you were right. Like, you were right to make me the special one. And I just had this dream to confirm it. And then I had another dream to like double confirm it. Like, you were right.
Sure. I'm just really glad he had that conversation with Dad, with all the brothers listening in the background. I appreciate that, Brent. I appreciate that. Lots of people out there will appreciate the role you're playing right now.
Also, how do we know it's wheat? and I'm a terrible person who lives on the Palouse because I'm not even completely confident of this, but when wheat grows, is it straight until it's like ready to be harvested?
Yep. And at the point of harvest, wheat will bow over. When you hear the story of like wheat and tares, the only way you can tell the difference once everything gets intermingled is the tares will stand straight up and wheat bows over at harvest. That's why in the parable you have to wait till the harvest. Otherwise, you'd misidentify the two. So,
well, that's a pretty bad image for Joseph then.
Yeah.
Turning it right back around.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
If Joseph is the tare, or if he's just immature wheat and his brothers are,
So the Hebrew doesn't say that it is wheat. So that's my error. Excuse me. But it does use the word aluma, which comes from the word to be dumb. So there is still some extra shade he's throwing on his brothers.
Okay. All right.
Keep us going, Brent.
Okay. Verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams.
All right, so let's just make one point here. This is real hatred in this family we're talking about. We're not talking about like a brother that... This is conspiracy for murder, not to use that term lightly. Like they're literally conspiring like how they could kill this brother. So we're not, even though we're kind of having fun as we learn about this story, we don't want to treat this as though there's some real hatred at play in this story. The other thing that I had a student years ago, one of our earliest students, Brad, he pointed out as he studied this story, he's like, man, Shechem is mentioned 3 times. Like it just feels unusual. Like I just don't get those kind of mentions that happen. Like it feels like that's there on purpose. And I don't even know if necessarily there is anything there, but it has led me for years to really kind of notice that in the paragraph. Elle, what comes to your mind when you think of Shechem being mentioned here?
From a historical and archaeological perspective, Shechem is a major trade center. It's a really big deal place. It's the capital of one of the little Canaanite kingdoms. Depending on the dating, of course, we can't be totally sure exactly when this story happens, but it's known for having this wild warlord of a king. There's mercenaries all around. So that contributes to Dad, Yaakov, being concerned about, hey, can you check in on the boys? But then additionally, right, when we start looking biblically, he's leaving, the text specifically says, as if we don't know, right? The original hearers of the story would know their geography, but it points out to us that he leaves the valley of Hebron, and chaver means friend. So he leaves the valley of friendship and he heads toward this place where already we've seen in the story violence happen multiple times. Well, in the same kind of setting. But we had violence happen to Dinah at the hand of the prince of Shechem. And then once, of course, in response to that, the whole populace of Shechem, according to the text, was slaughtered by the hand of 2 of the brothers who now are wandering around the region again, right? That's a big deal. You don't know what they're going to get up to. They're firecrackers of their own, right? So checking in on them isn't just like, make sure they're staying on task. It's like, whoa, this is a chaotic space. Warlord, mercenaries, and now we've got these brothers who led a trickster-oriented battle against the city. So he's got a good reason to want to check in on their peace, right? He asks them to check the peace of the brothers, not just like the health of the brothers, the well-being of the sheep, etc.
Totally. And to those ends, like on the flip side, the first mention of Shechem is where basically God gives his family, this family in Genesis, the family of God, their mission. So you have this like, okay, what are the brothers up to? Are they on track? That could be a literary allusion to, are they on track with the mission? Is there what's going on? You need to go check on that. And you pointed out, Elle, that that's also the place where sacrifice happens.
Right. Abraham builds an altar, I believe, and makes a sacrifice there. And in this Yosef story, we're going to see a whole bunch of sacrifice language a lot of the time, right? With the blood and the covering and the ripping, all that stuff. So I think there is something more than just the chronology going on here.
Oh, goody. All right. Well, before I get lost on that rabbit trail, go ahead, Brent.
Well, I'm also looking at this detail that they saw him in the distance. And how would they do that other than him wearing his fancy coat?
Yeah, it's true. Yep, the bedazzled jacket.
Again, it's fancy undergarment. So
I mean, whatever. I'm just thinking, like, how do they spot him so easily at a distance and have time to like come up with this plan to kill
it's
him?
a landscape, Brent. You've got nothing on the horizon. You're going to notice.
It's a swagger.
You're going to notice a person. Certainly. I'm just thinking, like, did he get the coat?
It's the sparkles.
And then he put it on immediately. And then he has the dream and he wakes up and he puts the coat on and goes and tells his brother about it. Like he's just throwing this in their face all the time.
Sure. Yep. Take us into some more, Brent.
When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard.
All right. So in this story, Reuben ends up trying to operate in the role of that firstborn son. I mean, Reuben's the one that should be, mathematically, chronologically, he should be if we want to call it the Bachor, whatever that would be. He's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to be the oldest brother. He's trying to represent the family. Maybe not well. I'm not saying Reuben's doing a fantastic job of this, but he's trying to basically save Joseph. But while he's gone, we have no idea where he goes, but he's clearly gone because he returns. So he's gone. And while he's gone, Judah steps up. Yehuda steps up and creates a new plan. And now Reuben is forced to, if he's going to band with his brothers, he's forced now to defend a plan that wasn't his. His plan was to come back and save Joseph, probably get the brothers to calm down. But the whole plan just kind of takes off on this other plan B that Judah comes up with. And I have often wondered, I don't think the text says this directly, that this creates quite the rift in the family, another dysfunctional rift in the family between, say, Reuben and Judah, because Judah in the very next story is not going to be with the family. He's going to be somewhere else. And so I have wondered at times if maybe even this family is just spiraling in dysfunction and all these different things causing division and splits within the brothers. But Brent, we probably need to keep moving right into the next story.
At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. Elle's face as I read these names is fantastic. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him.
Right, so here's some of this backstory. Judah's not, apparently, living with the larger extended Beit Av. He is somewhere else. And again, don't know if that's the reason why, but that's where this goes. Give us the next verse, Brent.
Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar.
All right, so her name is Tamar. Tamar is the Hebrew reference to a palm tree. Mm-hmm. And this is not the swooping palm tree of California. This is the straight palm tree of the Middle East, which becomes in a lot of ways a way that you could talk about righteousness. She's straight. She's upright. The righteous, upright. There you go. Perfect. And so that's going to be something that plays into her name. Elle, I was always taught that women are often named after trees because of this desire to want to be fruitful. What is your understanding of why are women's names so often trees?
Yes, that definitely plays a part in the cultural ideal of what you're looking for in a spouse, right? At that time, having kids is of the utmost importance. And so you do want somebody with a fruitful name. But it's just a cultural thing. Like we name women things like hope and grace. We don't tend to name boys things like wisdom and courage and strength or whatever. But other famous...
Challenge accepted if I have another child. I'm not going to, but...
Almost, just despite me.
That's right.
Interesting. The other famous woman named after a tree, of course, would be Hadassah or Queen Esther.
Oh, yes, the myrtle tree. Absolutely. All right, Brent. This episode's going to get long if I don't keep us moving, so go ahead and keep going.
But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother."
All right. For those of us that aren't used to the biblical culture, that's like, wait, what did he just say to do? And yet we have this concept of what I always heard called levirate marriage. And yet that is a Latin term Elle has taught me. So talk to us about this concept of levirate marriage, or what you would call it in the Hebrew, Elle.
Yep. In the Hebrew, it's yabum, but levirate marriage is practiced all over the world through all these different eras, from Japan to Sudan to Kurdistan to the Incans in Peru. So this isn't a weirdness in the biblical text. It is fairly normative for the time. The biblical practice is outlined in Deuteronomy 25, if you want to go read about it. And there is a protective quality to passing along a widow and keeping her in the Beit Av, which we've talked about being so important. You're keeping her within the legacy of the family, the community of the family, a place where she's known, rather than sending her back to her father's house, where then she has to be remarried, takes her dowry with her usually. However, the emphasis in the text is really about preserving the legacy and the honor of the dead first husband. It's very concerned about him having a child who is following in his legacy. And if you read Deuteronomy 25, you'll see that. So it's not just like a woo, protect women type thing, even though that is a certain quality to it. It's part of the role of the second brother as a kinsman redeemer, like we see in the Ruth story. And if he doesn't take up this role, this duty, this responsibility, he faces societal rejection. Deuteronomy says she gets to throw a shoe at him, which is pretty great.
Nice.
And if you're worried about, well, it's kind of creepy, what if the second brother, murders his first brother just so that he can claim his wife? They deal with that in the rabbinic literature. Somebody says if the brother is too eager to marry the woman because she's beautiful, then he's therefore guilty of incest and is liable to either exile or death, depending on the judgment. So that's the 101 on levirate marriage, or yabum.
Yeah. So the impulse here is should be one oriented around justice.
Sure.
Again, bringing people into that community, providing them with not just a place of belonging now, but also a future for them and the memory of a brother that's passed on and all those things. It's a very justice oriented. So let's see what happens. This is the family of God. This is what Avram, this is literally like the impulse that was driving Avram at the beginning of the story, as we saw it, as we heard from the Jewish wisdom. So Brent, give us the next handful of verses here.
But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up," for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep. And his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife.
Right, so now we have a little bit of that historical context and the background we need to somewhat appreciate what's going on in this narrative. Tamar has been slighted. Like, she has been mistreated. The stuff that we would expect to see in the family of God, the stuff from like Avram, like that has not, maybe it's just under Jacob's leadership in this family, but that's that same character, that same hospitality, that same whatever you want to call that integrity, isn't living on in the descendants at this point. And so she's been mistreated. She has suffered injustice, and now she's taking action. She's going to do something about this. So
love to see it.
Brent, give us the rest of the story so we can talk about the whole.
When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." Which, all sorts of questions so far. "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who live there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again.
Wow, I love the mention of righteous there. A call to her, maybe an allusion to her name and who she is and her character, at least on some really important level. What is it that stands out to us about this story? For the sake of time, I was going to ask you guys questions, but trying to save us from an hour and a half long episode here today. What strikes me about this story is where it sits. Well, first of all, that it's even here. Like, this is the story of Joseph. Like, what does this story have to do? Like, the story of Joseph begins in Genesis 37. We're going to pick right up with it in Genesis 39 and follow the Joseph story all the way. What does, like, it's an important story. It's important maybe for tomorrow's benefit. Is that the only reason that this story is here? Because it seems to be an odd addition. Its placement seems to be, it's maybe tell this, I don't know, maybe tell the story before the Joseph. It just feels weird. It feels like one of those whiplashes like we saw earlier with the Hagar and the Avraham story that we looked at that seemed to be pulled right next to each other on purpose. And so whenever we see two stories that maybe we wouldn't expect to be next to each other, but they are anyway, we might want to start looking for parallels. And Rabbi Foreman taught me about this word, this nachar word that shows up. Talk to us about the word nachar, Elle.
Nachar, in its noun form, means to be an outsider, specifically somebody who's scrutinized because they don't belong. Its verb form means to scrutinize. So we see it in this story. So when they talk about looking at this different evidence that Tamar has compiled on her behalf, they use this word nachar to scrutinize. And Tamar in this story is being treated like she's not an integral member of the Beit Av. She's being treated like an outsider in her own family, right? Because Yehuda sends her all the way back to her father's house, which we just talked about shouldn't have been what happens. And similarly, in the Yosef story, he, by his brothers, is being treated like an interloper. He shouldn't be the Bechor, and yet he seems to be chosen as one. And so they're trying to push him through the outside, even on pain of death.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so this word shows up twice in both stories. It shows up in the Joseph story in Genesis 37.
And this is where that presentation comes in, Marty.
Yes, absolutely. If you've
so
got
open
that,
up your presentation.
Yep, absolutely. We'll point out where these show up. They show up in the same way, in the same kind of place in these two stories. The brothers take the bloody robe, the bloody garment of Yosef, and they take it back to Jacob, and they say, examine this, scrutinize this, and see if you recognize it. That word for recognize being the same word there. Nachar, look at this, nachar this, and see if you nachar it. And then later in the Tamar story, she's going to take his, remember, and she sends this apparently back channel, private conversation. She gets accused, and she sends that staff and that cord that she has from Judah. And she says, nachar this, and see if you nachar it. This same exact repetition and usage shows up in both stories. So these stories are supposed to be tied together. As I sit in the Judah story, I'm now left with this, like, what is Judah going to do in this moment? Like, Judah has to come to grips with who he is and what he has done, which is not something great. So what is Judah going to do? Is he going to run from this moment? Is he going to ignore this moment? Is he going to deny this moment? Like, he's just been caught. And at this point, he hasn't been caught publicly. So what is he going to do? What will he do with his accuser, the one that he's victimized? Is he going to crush and destroy her? He definitely has the opportunity here. Is he going to defame her? Is he going to ridicule her? Is he going to make her lose face?
Try to blackmail her into not saying anything?
Blackmail her? Absolutely. Totally. And yet what we see is Judah publicly confess, fess up, acknowledge what's happened, call her righteous. He goes through this very appropriate process of repentance. And as we might learn later in the story, maybe not as full of a process as it could have been, but there's at least a public acknowledgement, and potentially we're going to see a real change in character for Yehuda. So, Brent, we got to keep going. I want to do 2 more chapters here, so let's keep moving.
Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me."
All right, now at this point in the story, I was raised on, I can't tell you how many youth group lessons about the valor of Joseph. Like, here he is in the throes of temptation, and he runs away because of his deep commitment to morality and integrity and faithfulness. And yet, pay attention to tell me what he says in the next 2 verses here, Brent. Listen to how moral and ethical his mind is, and go ahead.
But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?
All right. I didn't hear a whole lot of I heard a whole lot of, look at this position I have. Look at how great my life is. Look at how, there's this one passing phrase about sinning against God. But really, for me, I hear Joseph going I've got it so good.
Also valuable reasons to not ruin your life. It's like gratitude.
Sure. great practical wisdom.
Sure.
Maybe he's growing. He didn't even have practical wisdom before. Maybe as he's getting older, he's at least growing in practical wisdom. But this isn't exactly like my deep commitment to godly obedience and not exploiting somebody. It's still, again, and this is just me giving Joseph a hard time, but I digress.
And one of those things that I noticed in our original run was that it says Potiphar concerned himself only with the food he ate. So perhaps it is saying that he is not concerning himself enough with his wife.
It's an interesting. Elle, you got any thoughts on that? Is that do you feel like that's in there? Yeah.
He's described as a eunuch, so his wife might be going through it.
Ooh, sure. Okay.
Just to give her a little more empathy.
Yeah.
Than she usually gets.
Okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Yeah. That's a good point.
Well, okay, so where does it say that?
That's found in verse 1 when we're first introduced to Potiphar. It says that he's a saris of Pharaoh, which translation might go with officer or something, but saris means castrated. So he's a eunuch.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Learn something new every day.
Okay. Reading on then. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
Brent, I want you to read verse 21 one more time there towards the end. I want to ask Elle what this sounds like in the Hebrew and what she sees in this verse.
The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden.
Yeah, it feels like this is the great retort to Marty's, "You're being so hard on Joseph." Obviously, God is with him. He's perfect in every way imaginable. And Joseph is the greatest superhero of Genesis. It says so right there. What do we learn? What do we learn from verse 21 there, Elle?
I mean, I think it's a really helpful mnemonic for us when we talk about what does it mean that as God's people, we have his grace, we have his favor.
Right.
Sometimes what it looks like is you go to prison because you're falsely accused of something. But when you're there, the prison warden is nice to you.
Yep.
That's what it looks like. It's not the yellow brick road being paved with gold ahead of your ascension to heaven. It's finding light and finding hope in the darkest of places.
Absolutely. It's true, thankfully, that God loves to hang on to imperfect characters. God would seem to love every character of all of these stories and to long to be with them. And for maybe reasons that we understand at times and reasons we don't understand at times, he provides and takes care and blesses them in ways that make sense to us and ways that don't make sense to us. But thankfully, because I know I've been a pretty hot mess at times in my life, and God seemed to have taken care of me in some of those chapters pretty well. We got one more chapter. Brent, give us the first half of, maybe a little bit more. Give us the first little bit of Genesis 40.
Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" We both had dreams, they answered, but there is no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Which is funny. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon.
Right, there's that same, and I promise I'm going to start being nicer to Joseph, I promise. But here he is again. Make sure you remember me. Make sure you remember me. And again, I get it. And I heard what Elle said a moment ago. It was a good reminder. Here's this guy that's been wrongly accused and has ended up in prison. I just find it interesting that every time we encounter Yosef, he's like, here's my predicament. Here's me. Notice, like, remember me. Like, it's not the same thing that I saw with Avram. It feels different. It feels more Jacob than Avram. I'm getting Jacob, I think is what the kids would say. I'm getting Jacob.
It's giving Jacob.
There we go. Thank you. Elle nailed it. Okay, there we go. It's giving Jacob to me.
It's better to give than receive, as they say.
All right, finish off this chapter and this episode for us, Brent.
When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Not so favorable.
Nope.
Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.
Shucks. And we are going to leave this hanging right on that cliffhanger. I want to have a 2-part conversation. And so this is going to be part 1 of a 2-part conversation about Joseph. But as an act of reflection, I might just stop us here and go back to that word Nahar that we talked about earlier, just as some closing thoughts. If you were to trace Nahar, we talked about it showing up in Genesis 38 and Genesis 37. But if you were to follow that word, it's going to show up twice earlier too. And I find the mentions of Nahar so interesting. First mention is going to show up in Genesis 27 when Jacob is deceiving Isaac, stealing that birthright, and that recognize, that Nahar, that, what was the word you used? Scrutinize. I'll use scrutinize. So it shows up with Jacob's deception of Isaac. It's going to show up again when Jacob is deceiving Laban, if we remember that story, Jacob and Laban. And so it shows up in that story. It shows up twice in the deception of the brothers deceiving Jacob after they sell Yosef. It shows up in the Judah and Tamar story. This word seems to be pointing out this cycle of deception that keeps showing up in this family story. And these ancient Sumerian tales were built off of this assumption that history was cyclical. Like this is in the spiritual DNA of this family. They're deceivers. It's just who they're going to be. And I think one of the things that this story is kind of lulling us into is this question: does history simply repeat itself? Or are we able to break these cycles? Does history just cycle in itself, and one deception leads to another deception, leads to another deception, leads to another deception? Or are we going to find out, spoiler alert, that redemption, reconciliation is possible? The trajectory of a story can change radically, and God may in fact be up to something new and not the same old thing. Could this actually end up being a story about hope? We will see in next week's episode.
Okay, well, you can find the presentation and any other links we might have in the show notes, whether that's in your podcast app or on verymontdiscipleship.com. You can also use the website to get in touch with us. If you want to support our work, that will as well be in the show notes or on the website. Everything we do is made possible by listeners just like you. So thanks for joining us on the Bema Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hi, I'm Laura, a Bema listener in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. And here's a prayer from episode 15's companion. God, there are many times when worry takes root, and I rely on my own means and dreams. Forgive me. There are many times when my selfishness wins, and I seek my personal gain over justice and goodness. Forgive me. In those times I'm deep in a pit of my own making. Rescue me, God, and teach me again how to let go and trust in you, how to learn from my history, your history, to bless and change the world from here on out. Amen.